Good morning, preschool. Welcome back. Today we're going to have another look at my favourite author, Roald Dahl. He's the man that wrote, what have we read together? Let me think. The Enormous Crocodile. Where is he? Remember that cheeky crocodile. But today I thought we would read another one of his books about these two people. They make me laugh. And some of the things that they get up to quite funny, so we'll read it together. It's quite a long story though, so I'm going to read bits of it to you over the whole of the week. So what we need to do before we get ready to listen, let mummy and daddy do what they need to do. Get yourself all snuggly and switch on those listening ears. So we need good listening, we need good looking, and good sitting. Are we ready? 1 and 2, we know what to do. 3 and 4, we sit on the floor. 5 and 6, our legs we fix. 7 and 8, we sit up straight. 9 and 10, we're quiet again. Well done. Right. So you've got the Twits. Let's see if I can do this for you a bit better. Chapter 1, Hairy Faces. What a lot of hairy-faced men there are around nowadays. When a man grows hair all over his face, it is impossible to tell what he really looks like. Perhaps that's why he does it. He'd rather you didn't know. Then there's the problem of washing. When the very hairy ones wash their faces, it must be a big job, as when you and I wash the hair on our heads. So what I want to know is this. How often do all these hairy-faced men wash their faces? Is it only once a week, like us on Sunday nights? Or do they shampoo it? Do they use a hairdryer? Do they rub hair tonic in to stop their faces going bald? Do they go to a barber to have their hairy faces cut and trimmed? Or do they do it themselves? In front of the bathroom mirror, with nail scissors? I don't know, but next time you see a man with a hairy face, which will probably be as soon as you step out onto the street, maybe you will look at him more closely and start wondering about some of these things. You see all the hairy-faced men? Chapter 2, Mr. Twit. Can you see him? Mr. Twit was one of these very hairy-faced men. The whole of his face, except for his forehead, his eyes and his nose, was covered with thick black hair. The stuff even sprouted in revolting tufts out of his nostrils and his ear holes. Mr. Twit felt that his hairiness made him look terrifically wise and grand. But in truth, he was neither of these things. Mr. Twit was a twit. He was born a twit, and now, at the age of 60, he was a bigger twit than ever. The hair on Mr. Twit's face didn't grow smooth and matted as it does on most hairy-faced men. It grew in spikes that stuck straight out like bristles of a nail brush. And how often did Mr. Twit wash this bristly nail-brushy face of his? The answer is never. Not even on Sundays. He hadn't washed it for years. Chapter 3, Dirty Beards. As you know, an ordinary unhairy face like yours or mine simply gets a bit smudgy if it is not washed often enough, and there's nothing so awful about that. But a hairy face is a very different matter. Things cling to hairs, especially food. Things like gravy go right in amongst the hairs and stay there. You and I can wipe our smooth faces with a flannel, and we quickly look more or less all right again. But the hairy man cannot do that. We can also, if we are careful, eat our meals without spreading food all over our faces. But not so the hairy man. Watch carefully next time you see a hairy man eating his lunch, and you will notice that even if he opens his mouth very wide, it is impossible for him to get a spoonful of beef stew or ice cream and chocolate sauce into it without leaving some of it on the hairs. Mr. Twit didn't even bother opening his mouth wide as he ate. As a result, and because he didn't wash, there were always hundreds of bits of old breakfast and lunches and suppers sticking to the hairs around his face. They weren't big bits, mind you, because he used to wipe those off with the back of his hand on it or on his sleeve while he was eating. But if you look closely, not that you'd want to, you would see tiny little specks of dried up scrambled eggs stuck to the hairs, and spinach, tomato ketchup, and fish fingers, and minced chicken livers, and all other disgusting things Mr. Twit liked to eat. Look at him there, isn't he? Revolting. Blech. If you looked closer, hold your nose, ladies and gentlemen, you peered deep into the moustachy bristles sticking out over his upper lip, you would probably see much large objects that had escaped the wipe of his hand. Things that had been there for months and months. Like a piece of maggoty green cheese. Or mouldy cornflake. Or even the slimy tail of a sardine. Look how revolting. We've got cornflakes, stinky cheese, and tinned sardines. They're a type of fish. Blech. Because of all of this, Mr. Twit never really went hungry. By sticking out his tongue and curling it sideways to explore the hairy jungle around his mouth. Like that. Have a go. He was always able to find a tasty morsel here and there to nibble on. What I'm trying to tell you is that Mr. Twit was a foul and smelly old man. He was an extremely horrid old man, as you will find out in a moment. Can you see my cat? She's come to join us. Chapter 4. Mrs. Twit. Look at her. Mrs. Twit was no better than Mr. Twit. She did not, of course, have a hairy face. It was a pity she didn't, because that, at any rate, would have hidden some of her fearful ugliness. Take a look at her. Go on, have a good look. Have you ever seen a woman with an uglier face than that? I doubt it. But the funny thing is that Mrs. Twit wasn't born ugly. She had quite a nice face when she was young. The ugliness had grown upon her year by year as she got older. Why would that happen? I'll tell you why. You see, she's changed, hasn't she? If a person has ugly thoughts, it begins to show on the face. And when that person has ugly thoughts, every day, every week, every year, the face gets uglier and uglier until it gets so ugly you can hardly bear to look at it. A person who has good thoughts cannot ever be ugly. You can have a wonky nose and a crooked mouth and a double chin and stick out teeth. But if you have good thoughts, they will shine out of your face like sunbeams, and you will always look lovely. Nothing shone out of Mrs. Twit's face. In her right hand she carried a walking stick. She used to tell people that this was because she had warts growing on the soles of her feet, and walking was painful. But the real reason she carried a walking stick was that she could hit things with it, like dogs, cats, and small children. And then there was the glass eye. Mrs. Twit had a glass eye that was always looking the other way. Chapter 5. The Glass Eye. Ooh, isn't she horrid? You can play a lot of tricks with a glass eye because you can take it out and pop it back in again anytime you like. You can bet your life Mrs. Twit knew all these tricks. One morning, she took out her glass eye and dropped it into Mr. Twit's mug of beer. When he wasn't looking, Mr. Twit sat there drinking the beer slowly. The froth made a white ring of hair around his mouth. He wiped the white froth on his mouth, onto his sleeve, and wiped his sleeve onto his trousers. Oh, he's dirty, isn't he? "You're plotting something," Mrs. Twit said, keeping her back turned so he wouldn't see that she had taken out her glass eye. "Whenever you go all quiet like that, I know very well you're plotting something." Mrs. Twit was right. Mr. Twit was plotting away like mad. He was trying to think up a really nasty trick he could play on his wife that day. "You better be careful," Mrs. Twit said, "because when I see you starting to plot, I watch you like a wombat." "Oh, do shut up, you old hag," Mr. Twit said. He went on drinking his beer, and his evil mind kept working away on the latest horrid trick he was going to play on the old woman. Suddenly, Mr. Twit tipped the last drop of beer down his throat. He caught sight of Mrs. Twit's awful glass eye staring up at him from the bottom of the mug. It made him jump. "I told you I was watching you," cackled Mrs. Twit. "I've got eyes everywhere, so you better be careful." Chapter 6. The Frog. Mimi. She wants to join the story. To pay her back for the glass eye in his beer, Mr. Twit decided he would put a frog in Mrs. Twit's bed. He caught a big one down by the pond and carried it back secretly in a box. That night, when Mrs. Twit was in the bathroom getting ready for bed, Mr. Twit slipped the frog between her sheets. Then he got into his own bed and waited for the fun to begin. You see it? Mrs. Twit came back and climbed into bed and put out the light. She lay there in the dark, scratching her tummy. Her tummy was itchy. Dirty old hags, like her, always have itchy tummies. Ooh. Then all at once she felt something cold and slimy creeping over her feet. She screamed. "What's the matter?" said Mr. Twit. "Help!" screamed Mrs. Twit, bouncing about. "There's something in my bed!" "I'll bet it's a giant skillywiggler I saw on the floor just now," Mr. Twit said. "The what?" screamed Mrs. Twit. "I tried to kill it, but it got away," Mr. Twit said. "It's got teeth, like screwdrivers." "Help!" screamed Mrs. Twit. "Save me! It's all over my feet!" "Oh, it'll bite your toes off," said Mr. Twit. Mrs. Twit fainted. Mr. Twit got out of bed and fetched a jug of cold water. He poured the water over Mrs. Twit's head to revive her. Oh. The frog crawled up from under the sheets and got near the water. It started to jump about on the pillow. Frogs love water. This one was having a great time. You see imagine that in your bed? When Mrs. Twit came to, the frog had jumped onto her face. This is not a nice thing to happen to anyone in bed at night. She screamed again. By golly, it is a giant skillywigger. Wiggler, Mr. Twit said. It'll bite off your nose. Mrs. Twit leapt out of bed and flew downstairs and spent the night on the sofa. The frog went to sleep on her pillow. I'm going to leave it there for today. I'm going to read you some more tomorrow about, says the wormy, spaghetti. I wonder what that's going to be about. Look after yourselves, everybody, and we will see you tomorrow.